Welcome to the modern elite pursuit is the oldest lie men tell themselves about attraction. The common belief is simple. Try harder, show up more, make her feel chosen, be persistent, be available, let her know she matters. The cultural script has been the same for 100 years. If you want a woman, you go after her. You demonstrate interest, you escalate, you close the gap. Here is what nobody says out loud. Every step you take toward her is a broadcast, not to her conscious mind, to something far older than consciousness. And that broadcast does not say, I want you. It says this man had no better options. There is a specific mechanism in evolutionary biology documented in male behavior across dozens of species and mapped onto human neurology that explains why pursuit is not romantic. It is a confession. By the end of this, you will understand exactly what you are confessing every time you chase, and you will understand why the man who stops confessing wins every time. The mate value paradox. In 1882, one of the most brilliant philosophical minds in human history made one of the most catastrophic romantic errors ever recorded. Friedrich Nietzsche met a 21-year-old Russian intellectual named Lou Salome. She was extraordinary, a writer, a philosopher, a woman who could engage his ideas and refused to be dominated by anyone. NZA was completely undone. He didn't hold his frame. He didn't stay in his world. He wrote poems about her. He proposed marriage, not once but twice, not directly. He sent mutual friends as intermediaries because he could not tolerate the vulnerability of a direct rejection. He wrote letters that described her as the person his entire life had been pointing toward. He restructured his thinking around the possibility of her. She turned him down both times, and then she cut contact entirely. History frames this as a story about incompatibility, about her choosing his friend Paul Ray instead, about philosophical differences. That's not what happened. Salome wrote about it years later with uncomfortable clarity. What repelled her wasn't his mind. She considered it among the greatest she had encountered. What repelled her was the need. She described feeling like the object of a desperate requirement rather than the target of a genuine desire. And she drew a distinction that most men never learn to make. Need says you are my solution. Desire says you interest me. She had felt need, and something deep in her nervous system found it intolerable. The irony is almost unbearable. One of the most brilliant, most internally rich, most philosophically forceful men of his century reduced himself to a supplicant, and the more he pursued, the faster she retreated. This is the mate value paradox. David Buss spent decades studying how humans evaluate potential mates across cultures on 6 continents. One of his most consistent findings, women are acutely sensitive to what he identified as attention allocation signals, not just status or resources, attention itself. How a man distributes his focus communicates beneath conscious processing what options he has available. A man who pursues intensely is sending a very specific signal. His attention is a cheap, she is clearly the best available option. He has auditioned the competition and concluded she wins by default. That is not desire, that is a census result. And the ancient evaluation hardware in her brain, the same circuitry that was processing male fitness signals for 100,000 years before language existed, runs that calculation whether she intends it or not. She doesn't decide to lose attraction. Her biology executes the verdict before her conscious mind finishes the sentence. The man reading this right now has almost certainly been on both sides of this dynamic. He has pursued someone who felt untouchable and watched her grow colder with each effort he made. He has also, in some moment of genuine distraction, absorbed in something that actually mattered, had a woman come to him without understanding why. He attributed the second situation to luck. He blamed himself for the first. Neither explanation was accurate. Both were biology. Now flip it. The man who doesn't pursue, who offers no unsolicited demonstrations of interest, whose attention when it arrives is precise and rare, he sends a different signal entirely. His attention is expensive. She has no evidence he distributes it freely. She doesn't know what she did to earn it. She doesn't know what she might do to lose it. And that uncertainty is not discomfort. That uncertainty is the beginning of obsession. Gravity doesn't move towards smaller objects. It sits at the center of its own mass and bends the space around it. The question is never whether to chase. The question is whether you have built enough mass that the chase reverses direction. The biological confession. Here is the point that should stop you mid-breath. Your body already knows when you're chasing. Long before she can articulate anything about your behavior, her nervous system is running a scan on yours. When a man enters a pursuit state, when he becomes emotionally invested in a specific outcome with a specific woman, his physiology responds. Cortisol elevates under rejection anxiety. Testosterone measurably decreases. The voice shifts upward in pitch. Eye contact breaks more frequently. Laughter arrives too easily. Posture makes small, almost imperceptible accommodations, weight shifting, unnecessary smiling, a slight forward lean that communicates not confidence but supplication. None of this is intentional, none of it is chosen, but every signal is being processed in real time by the same neural hardware her female ancestors used to assess male fitness on the African savanna. Researchers studying male vocal patterns have documented this with uncomfortable precision. Men in active courtship pursuit shift their vocal register upward, not dramatically, but consistently. Women reliably rate lower, more stable voices as higher value, not because they were instructed to, because their body ran the algorithm automatically. The voice is a barometer of internal state. So is eye contact. So is the speed of response. So is the way a man navigates silence. These things are not performance variables. They are exhaust pipes. They reveal what is burning inside the engine. You cannot technique your way out of this. That is the truth that most seduction content is built to avoid saying. You can memorize every psychological principle, deploy every conversational tactic, execute every pattern with clinical precision, and her nervous system will still detect the baseline biological signal underneath it. Techniques applied from a foundation of desperation smell like desperation. The smell doesn't come from the technique, it comes from the state. Epictetus built an entire philosophy around the division between what is within your control and what is not. She is not within your control. Her response is not within your control. Her desire, her decision, whether she stays or leaves, chooses you or doesn't, these exist entirely outside the boundary of your governance. The moment you stop treating her choice as something you can engineer through effort, something real shifts in your biology. The cortisol drops, testosterone stabilizes, the voice settles back into its natural register. The eye contact holds, not because you forced it, but because there is nothing to be anxious about, nothing to lose. The outcome stopped being the point. Marcus Aurelius wrote that desire detached from outcome is the only desire that does not enslave its owner, not because the wanting disappears, because the needing does. And the man who wants fully but needs nothing carries a frequency that the man trying everything cannot manufacture. That distinction, desire without need, is the entire mechanism. Not a trick, not a frame you perform, a genuine internal state. And she detects the difference, the way you detect the difference between a room that is locked and a room where someone simply happens to be elsewhere. The Byron effect. In 1812, a poet named George Gordon Byron became the most pursued man in London aristocratic society without doing a single deliberate thing to pursue anyone. He published a poem called Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. It was dark, brooding, partially autobiographical. It featured a protagonist who was magnetic and destructive and entirely self-contained, a man who had measured the world's approval and found it insufficient, a man whose inner world was so full, so complicated, so consuming that external validation barely registered as a category. Women lost their minds. They weren't just responding to his looks, they were responding to what the poem communicated about his internal architecture. He was a man with an entire inner world, dense, consuming, a world that was complete without them. Lady Caroline Lamb famously described him as mad, bad, and dangerous to know. This was intended as a warning. It functioned as advertising. Half of aristocratic London formed a queue. Annabella Milbanke pursued him. Teresa Guiccioli crossed Europe for him. Women who had never met him sent declarations of love to his publisher's address. Byron didn't chase. He was too absorbed in being Byron, in the dark, turbulent, artistically consuming project of his own existence, his poetry, his politics, his physical obsessions, his eventual decision to fight and die for Greek independence rather than live quietly in England with any one of 100 women who wanted him. Here is what this reveals about attraction mechanics. Mystery without substance is a magic trick. It works once. The audience wants their money back the second time. Byron was not performing mystery. He was genuinely consumed by something larger than any individual woman. His life had weight, a texture, the sense of a man who was in the middle of going somewhere significant. And any woman entering his orbit was entering an ongoing story, not being written into a new one. This is the Byron effect, and it has nothing to do with being dark or difficult. It has everything to do with purpose. When a man is genuinely building something, not performing the act of building, but actually inside the construction, his time is genuinely scarce. His attention is genuinely rare. His interest in any particular woman, when it appears, is real because it is competing against something that actually demands his energy. And the woman who encounters this man, who can feel the weight of everything else he carries, understands intuitively that his attention landing on her is not the default. It is a selection. Being selected by a man who selects everyone is meaningless. Being selected by a man who is mostly unavailable, genuinely unavailable because his life is full, is an entirely different psychological experience. She starts asking questions she wasn't asking before. What is it about her? What she said? What quality surfaced that landed differently than the others? She starts working for something she didn't consciously decide to work for, not because you manipulated her into it, because real scarcity triggers real pursuit. The architecture of desire is not complicated, it is just brutal. The scarcity she cannot argue with. In 6th century Constantinople, the Emperor Justinian fell into a fixation with a woman named Theodora. This was a political catastrophe. Theodora had been an actress. In Byzantine Roman law, actresses were legally barred from marrying into the senatorial class. The prohibition was centuries old, architecturally embedded in imperial moral tradition. It was not a suggestion, it was written law. Justinian changed the law not quietly. He had his uncle, the Emperor Justin, issue an imperial edict. He rewrote Roman legal tradition that had stood for generations for a woman who until that moment had been entirely occupied with her own life. Her conversion to Christianity, her work as a wool spinner in Alexandria, her return to Constantinople with nothing more strategic than survival. Theodora was not angling for an emperor. She had no proximity campaign, no manufactured availability. She had her own world, her own center of gravity. She was not waiting to be found. She was somewhere else being herself. And Justinian, one of the most powerful men alive, with every woman in the Byzantine Empire accessible to him, walked into that gravity and couldn't leave. Robert Cialdini spent a career documenting what he called psychological reactance, the human response to perceived scarcity. When access is restricted, desire intensifies in proportion to the restriction, not because humans are perverse, because scarcity is evolutionary data. If something is rare, the brain infers it is probably rare because it is valuable. The inference runs automatically at hormonal level before rational thought enters the picture. But here is the nuance that every surface level application of this principle gets catastrophically wrong. Manufactured scarcity doesn't hold. If you are deliberately making yourself scarce as a strategy, calculating response times, engineering absence, performing unavailability, she will eventually calibrate to the game. Women have been navigating male romantic strategy for their entire adult lives. The pattern recognition system, she will notice the inconsistency between the effort you have made to be present and the artificial distance you're now creating. And when she sees the game, the scarcity evaporates. What was presented as rare reveals itself as deliberate. Deliberate withholding feels like punishment, not value. Authentic scarcity is different in kind, not just degree. Authentic scarcity is not a strategy. It is the natural consequence of a life that actually demands your attention. When you are genuinely absorbed in something that matters, a business you are building from the ground up, a craft that costs you sleep, a physical transformation that demands your body every morning, an intellectual pursuit that makes you unreachable for hours, you are not creating scarcity, you are experiencing it, and she experiences it alongside you, and she sends a message. Your response arrives 3 hours later, not because you calculated the appropriate window, because you were inside something real and your phone was irrelevant. She doesn't just notice the timing, she notices the energy behind the timing. There's a textural difference between a man who delayed responses as a strategy and a man who delayed responses because his life is full. She can feel that difference before she can name it. And this is the architecture of the whole thing. It is not one technique. It is not a sequence of moves. It is the complete inversion of where your energy points. The man who wins without chasing is not performing an absence. He is embodying a presence, the presence of someone fully, genuinely, irrevocably invested in the construction of himself. Someone who encounters her not as a destination, but as an intersection. Fascinating, worth slowing for, worth exploring, but never the entire journey. Justinian didn't change Roman law because Theodora played hard to get. He changed it because she was genuinely, completely somewhere else living a life. The pursuit was entirely his and the gravity was entirely hers. Every technique and every seduction manual, every calculated move, every psychological tactic, it all collapses without this foundation underneath it. Because women are not evaluating your behavior in isolation, they are evaluating your behavior as evidence of your internal state. And your internal state is the one thing you cannot fake indefinitely. You can maintain a performance for a week, a month, if you are disciplined. But eventually the man you actually are when no one is watching will surface. The man who needs her approval, the man who built his sense of worth around her response, the man who is performing non-chasing while internally screaming. She will feel that man before she can name him, and she will begin to leave before she understands why. Nietzsche, after Lou Salome rejected him, disappeared into the most productive period of his life. Thus spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, the works that made him immortal. He didn't plan it that way. He wasn't strategizing. He collapsed back into his own world because she was gone. And in the absence of the chase, something extraordinary filled the space. He became impossible to ignore. This is not motivational packaging. This is the actual sequence. The obsession with a woman consumes the bandwidth required to become someone worth obsessing over. And the man who reclaims that bandwidth, not as a tactic, not to make her jealous, but because the alternative is wasting the only life he has, that man becomes the thing she thinks about when she's supposed to be thinking about something else. The brutal irony of attraction is this: the moment she stops being your goal and starts being a worthy addition to a life that already has direction, that is the precise moment she becomes impossible to lose. Most men never reach this, not because they lack intelligence, because they were never asked the right question. The question isn't whether you can stop chasing. The question is, what have you built that's worth coming back to when the chasing stops? That answer is either already inside you, or it's the only work that actually matters right now. If this cracks something open, understand that what I can say publicly is only a fraction of what exists. There are videos I cannot release to a general audience, advanced frameworks on female desire psychology, attraction mechanics at the biological level, and relationship dynamics that the platform actively suppresses. The algorithm doesn't reward the most powerful information. It clears throat, buries it. Those videos live behind the join button. Subscribe if you haven't, but if you want the unfiltered version, the knowledge that doesn't make it to public uploads, click join and step into the sovereign level. Raw, uncensored, hidden from everyone who didn't stay this long. Most won't join. That's by design.